Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This year I'm taking part in Dungeon23, which is a challenge where people write a small chunk of a dungeon each day. There is a variant called City 23, which I'm using to collect ideas for a Mythic Venice supplement. The January episode is already up, and none of you told me to stop, so this will be the February episode. The 1st of February. The inevitable gondola episode. Gondolas appear in the documentary record at the end of the 12th century, according to Ackroyd, which is earlier than some of my preliminary reading. Game period gondolas are shorter and wider than modern ones, and they are symmetrical. Modern ones are slightly asymmetrical to improve manoeuvrability. They have cabins, some of which are removable. They are liveried, but I'm not sure that's required. Noble houses have multiple, but there are public ones for hire. All ornamentation is forbidden on gondolas in 1562 as part of the Venetian sumptuary laws. During Elizabeth's reign, there are 10,000 gondolas in the city. Gondoliers must be discreet. This is odd in a city of spies, but if a gondolier denounces a lady to her husband, the other gondoliers drown him. They are trusted with sensitive letters. After 20 years of service, a gondola is too warped to use and is incinerated at Murano to heat the glassworks. This is a link for sympathetic magic. February the 2nd. Sumptuary laws. Venetian law is believed to be ancient and fair, but changes weekly. Adventure Idea, the traditionalist and transitionalist Guanakai, come to study this paradox and create a third faction. Venetian law is codified at the end of the 12th century, but custom may override written law. Venetian trials are pragmatic, swift, and efficient. Lawyerly tricks are despised. Venetian legislation is a constant, basically futile process. Laws may not be enforced. Traditions that are unsupported are retrospectively buttressed by law. Ackroyd mentions sumptuary law and makes the novel point that its purpose is to stop the poor loathing the rich enough to rebel. Feasts were circumscribed because they brought together powerful people who might conspire against the state. Slaves and cooks were paid to inform on those who had feasts. Sumptuary laws were often ignored but could annoy magi. The law saying that you can't wear more than 2 rings, or you're not allowed to wear anything, X, might prohibit the mundane shape of a magic item. As an adventure idea, the characters may want to change the law to allow them to carry openly a magic item imported from another state. Sumptuary laws are fiercest when the state is in trouble. After losses against the League of Cambrai, the state cracks down very hard, no swanning about being rich and carefree when the midden is hitting the windmill. February 3rd. The metaphorical personification of Venice as a body for Nerea. Nerea, as mentioned in the January 18th episode, is the spirit from Deep Fairy that the Master of Games is drawing forth. Venetian artists love to compare the city to a body. What bits are which varies, but they get really complicated about it, down to its circulatory system and digestive tract. Venice has a desire to grow, express its quintessent self, reproduce, as in Crete and Corfu, and it has a sort of nervous system and reflexive reactions. Henry James says that Venice notices your affection. This is the opposite of what I expected, which was more of a New York is a Woman by Suzanne Vega thing. He thought Venice mild, interesting, and sad. This is the body of Nerea, not the Queen in Glass. That might be important, maybe it isn't. Maybe that's just a sort of interface for dealing with humans. The civic plan of 1557 is the city's final physical border. After that, it concentrates on internal complexification. There's a note here to check Life in the Lagoons from 1909. A covenant could be a parish about a campo, or all of them could be stuck in a single place, much as the German merchants are stuck in a single place. Does Nerea have different moods in her different suburbs? Ackroyd says that the stones are the soul of Venice. Does that mean that Nerea inhabits them as her anchor? He also notes that Venice has eclectic architecture, not solemn or menacing. Venice's basic social unit is the family. The family can be fined for transgressions of members. Businesses are run in families. The Senate is a meeting of aristocratic families. It's common for only one patrician male in each generation to marry, and for unmarried men to leave their estates to their nephews. There's a bee metaphor here that Ackroyd runs with that I'll skip. And Venice runs orphanages and public health care. February 4th, education. There is no university in Venice, although there is one in Padua, which is a possession so loyal that after the League of Cambrai take it, it rebels to restore Venetian rule. There are grammar schools in every Cercis, and there are academies, public and private tutors, and the most favoured subjects are very practical. Venetian clubs, societies and salons specialise in all kinds of things, so fields of learning are possible. Ackroyd says that the Renaissance came late to Venice because it was so interested in practical things. He seems not in this to factor in technological progress or artistic progress. His story about Galileo is that he's a lecturer in maths at Padua, invents the telescope, and he pitches it as a device to detect enemy ships at a distance. For this, he's made Professor of Astronomy for life and paid an ungodly salary. The epicentre of European printing is Venice. Paper comes from Venetian territory near Lake Garda. Staley says that the Dogeressa is the special patroness of printing. Around 1500, there are around 200 print shops in Venice. Venice finds a way to commodify learning as books. One of the early printers ran a sort of printer academy. His name was Aldus Manutitis. Venetians may only study at Padua. None of this weird foreign learning for a Venetian. Walsingham, our constant interest in Magonomia, and probably your character's boss in some versions of the game, studied at Padua. Padua has all kinds of cool stuff, seriously. We should do some sort of setting here. It was the secular centre of learning in Europe, according to Ackroyd. The city does not support literature. Its best-known writers do memoirs. Casanova, Marco Polo. It is the home of rags to riches fairy tales like Puss in Boots, and Venetians use their own language when legislating and public speaking, but use Greek, then French, then Tuscan as their language of learning. I'd just note that Tuscan there is the direct ancestor of modern Italian. Venetian is intelligible, but has an accent. For example, they use the letter Z far more often. February the 5th, colours. Ackroyd goes into the dyeing trade a bit on pages 222 and 223. I can reuse some of that for the colourman alchemy stuff I was working on for London. See also Colour by Finlay and Chromatopia by Coles. Ackroyd mentions some familiar sources of colour: orpiment, realgar, vermilion, lead white, lapis lazuli. He mentions but doesn't name ultramarine. He also mentions saffron from the east, but seems again to be coy about the slave plantations that the Venetians had there. Venetian red is a new one on me, Veneto, it's a mineral, and it's used to colour the blood of Christ. Colourmen, which I mentioned before, are people who make paint and dye. Before about 1500-ish, artists used to make their own colour, and later the colourmen are linked to the apothecaries and cosmetics. That is, they're a branch of alchemy. Cleopatra wrote a treatise on cosmetic alchemy, but I'm not sure if it's known in period. Secret Society stuff, maybe. Added later, Venice is also a centre of marquetry. Glass tesserae, which come from Murano, are knitted in the shape and material table. February 6th. Carnival. Ackroyd says that Carnival dates from the end of the 11th century. Carnival's webpage gives 1162. Originally it was 40 days long. Eventually it became 6 months. It encouraged tourism, it made the people less likely to rebel, and made Venice seem rich and powerful. It makes works for musicians, theatrical performers, and pyrotechnicians. Lots of sex work, theoretically, and gambling, certainly. There's a group here called the Tolomasi who act as guides, translators, and money changers all in one. That could be a useful contact for the player characters, or a player character option. Masks are first mentioned in 1268. Gambling while masked is forbidden. By the 18th century, everyone is masked during Carnival except money changers. Masked balls were open to everyone with a mask. You were expected not to break character. A full description of the main masks and characters will occur later in the sequence of episodes. The state doesn't own a casino, but it does license casinos. There is a city lottery, however. The price for 1590 was 100,000 crowns. February 7th. Sports. A popular sport in Venice is the labour of Hercules, which is making human pyramids. Rackets, fencing, horse and boat racing, and balloon, which is a sort of football, were popular. They were always competitive and there were always prizes. One sport that's of interest to us is the War of Fists, which is people fighting over bridges. There are two great tribes in this, the Castellani, who are from the Arsenalotti, the people around the arsenal, and the Nicolotti, who are the fisherfolk. For the War of Fists, you can use helmets, shields, and rattan clubs, and the idea is to take and hold the bridge. The bridge is over a canal, by the way, so if you get knocked off, you just land in the water to the amusement of everyone nearby. This seems to post-date Ars Magica and predate Magonomia. February the 8th. Art. Art is produced in workshops using a sort of assembly line. There's no suggestion that a single artist should do all of the work. Painters are a trade guild, and there's no real difference between portrait artists and commercial painters because famous artists are commercial painters. Many have sidelines doing set dressing for the theatre or for the state. There's one painter, the state painter, in charge of professional banners, state processional properties, and maintaining official portraits. Venetian artists are known for quick, improvised work. There are basically two schools of thought, which Ackroyd calls the opulent and narrative. Two fires in the 1570s see a heap of public art in the ducal palace replaced. A fresh history is published to explain the new art. History is refurbished. Vasari, who's turned up as a villain before in the podcast because he hated Cellini, was annoyed that Venetians don't sketch out before they paint. Paintings are not meant to be accurate historically, they're not very experimental, they are meant to look good to the purchasers and their friends. The Venetians were huge fans of cartography as decoration, and arguably they were the most accurate cartographers in the world. There are some brilliant period maps which I should steal as decoration for the final project. Music is very important in the state. All guilds have songs. Most popular songs already have dances attached to them or will quickly develop them. All festivals have music. This is because music, the harmonious choral activity, is seen as a symbol of the harmony of the state. You aren't allowed to applaud in church. Singers do have a guild. Female orphanages trained talented singing girls as choirs. Some were so good they could make listeners faint, weep, or propose marriage. This sounds like a hedge tradition. Dancing is popular and schools exist. Music is for sale as printed sheets, and this is invented in Venice, centre of trade and commodification of art. Instrument fabrication for export is also a specialty of Venice, particularly and strangely church organs. February the 9th. Sex work. Ackroyd's numbers are weird. He says 10,000 out of a population of 100,000 were sex workers, female sex workers. So that's 20% of women and no men at all. So I must have misread what he was saying. He suggests that dowry inflation makes it so that only one child in each patrician family can be a bride, and so lots of horny patrician men and lots of nuns are about. In addition to basic sex work, there's an upper-class geisha sort of deal called the honest courtesan, and Ackroyd suggests that Coriat suggests that you should carry moly, a herb, so that they can't charm you. This is clever, witty, and political, because moly is the herb that Hermes tells Odysseus to eat, so that Circe cannot charm him. Moly is, I believe, poisonous, though probably not a good idea. Sex work is a licensed profession. They have a guild. In Venice, homosexuality is illegal, and that doesn't work at all. Ackroyd suggests that good cruising spots were certain churches, gyms, apothecaries, and pastry makers, and honestly, Ackroyd would know. He did a lengthy discussion of gay culture in London, which at some point we should mine for Magonomia, because it's brilliant. I'm probably not the author for that, though. He then discusses Cicibeo, that's Cicisbeo, pardon to any Italians listening, I have no accent. These are male escorts, arguably not sex workers, that women are expected to have with them in the 16th century. Some Cicibae lived in the household and many were gay, according to Ackroyd. They were for public show and husbands were expected to insist on their presence. That is, they acted as a sort of chaperone to maintain the honour of the wife. Ackroyd notes that prostitutes and nuns tended to get on really well as women outside the civic structure. I've seen that noted in several places. February 10th. Places I need plans for. The Doge's Palace, the Basilica, St Mark's Square. The gibbet leaves the square in 1505 in the real world. In 1550, Jacopo Sansovino remodels the square to be more classical, and he builds the library in the Mint. I need to check Thomas Coriat's book. I need to make sure the Church of St Germain is in the plans, and it's pulled down by Napoleon, which is why it's not in the modern place. I need plans for San Zachariah. Ruskin has the Basilica of Torcello as the centre for the Infernal, which I am happy to steal. German Merchant Palace, that's the Fondaco de Tedeschi. It's something like that. It could be used as a version of a hermetic quarter. It's a current-day shopping centre, so there are maps online. Wiki Architecture is also good for details. So is churchesofvenice.com. And then there's also another note of De Barbari's woodcut of Venice, view of Venice, which I should use as art. February 11th, the Church. Bishops are appointed by the Senate. Bishops who receive orders from the Pope cross-check them with the Council of Ten. St Mark, or possibly St Mary, is the top saint. Ackroyd draws the link to Orthodox Caesaropapism in Constantinople. Sermons were checked by bureaucrats. Protestants are accepted by the government. Jews are accepted by the government. Venice has more miracles per square foot than any comparable space. They see the city itself as an act of God, and so they don't care about the popes. Venetian carnivals are expected to report back on the secret councils of the Vatican. They are very attached to relics, and they import a heap of them, icons too. Saints who were stolen for Venice wanted to be stolen, or they would have stopped it using miracles. Many religious houses are named after Old Testament figures. St Francis lobs in during the 1220s. He's on his way to try and convert the Sultan. This is where the Franciscans have their church. Children taunt Jesuits in the street. The Inquisition arrives in 1571, and uniquely, the Venetians force changes so that there are 6 judges, 3 ecclesiastic and 3 secular. Sentences are comparatively light. The usual sentence for witchcraft was the pillory. Property owners of a parish elect their priests. There are about 600, of whom 75% are not of the patrician class. In the 17th century, the Pope excommunicates Venice, and in response, priests were forbidden to read the papal bull and threatened with hanging if they closed their churches. Basically, the people didn't care. February 12th, Ackroyd's notes on Venetian witchcraft. Venetians are very superstitious. This is an extension of folk Catholicism. Their witchcraft is focused on wealth, good fortune, and healing. The devil is big on contracts in Venice, and he often accepts coins or salt for minor things. Gamblers use charms a lot. Ackroyd mentions a love potion made of sage and a woman's own menstrual blood and mixed with the food of a man who they wish to charm. There are lots of ghosts. Second sight is only found in those not properly baptized. Unfinished business is usually a hidden treasure, and there are haunted canals and houses. And I've noted a cross-reference to Marina's Whale in Staley, which was a very early Venice episode, which is a Banshee variant. February 13th, the Spanish plot. In the real world, this happened in 1618, but for Magonomia, you could put it earlier. On the 18th of May, 2 anonymous bodies were found on the public gibbet. They are by rumour French, and no official says anything, which of itself is unusual. People notice 500 French merchants have gone missing. The rumour spreads that the Council of Ten drowned them all. The story circulates that the Spanish and French, plus some mercenaries, had formed a pact to set fires simultaneously at the Arsenal, Mint, and Ducal Palace. This may not have been true. This might have been a crowd hysteria with the same sort of deadly effect. This isn't in my notes, but I'll mention it now. There is a particular point in the canals outside of Giudecca where they drop dead people so that they wash out with the tide. Well, executed dead people. Ackroyd's notes on law. February 14th. Ackroyd mentions a guild of death. Executions are solemn and public. People are strangled privately in the cells under the Doge's palace, and their bodies are dumped in the Canale Orfano. There we go. Simple punishments. Forging coins, burned alive. Senators singing blasphemous songs, tongues ripped out and their hands cut off. Friar who impregnated 15 nuns, burned at stake. priests accused of treason, burned alive upside down. It's not true in the real world that the Council of Ten had a band of assassins on retainer, but in the game world, it's true, and it's not just them. Insulting Venice can get you killed or have your tongue ripped out. Property crime is more important than violence to Venetians. For theft, you're hanged. For rape, you get sent to prison for 8 days and then a fine equal to the dowry. Patricians are the most violent class. All men carry knives. There is a special police force called the Lords of the Night who keep peace at night time. Even today, nighttime Venice is quieter than other cities because there's less traffic and pedestrians. I don't have this mentioned here, but in another book, it was mentioned that the Lords of the Night were also responsible for gate-crashing gay clubs. Strange, I must have read that later. Moving on. February 15, Caterina Sforza. Having broken down Venice pure city for RPG hooks, the next book is Daughters of Alchemy by Meredith K. Ray. I feel like I have made a mistake there. Yes, I have. During my notes, I keep swapping between K and Ray, but yes, it's Meredith K. Ray. It leads out by talking about Caterina Sforza and her book Experimenti. Sforza is the maternal great-grandmother of Catherine de' Medici, the sorceress rival queen in the Magenomia setting. Experimenti, or Experiments in English, is a book of secrets. That is, it's part of a genre of writing of the time. She swaps secrets with people. She's part of a republic of letters. See the Catholic wizard in the Tower of London in the basic Magenomia rules. For Ars Magica players, this is an epistle network. See the core rules. Experimenti isn't a philosophical book. There's none of that mucking about trying to get to immortality that you get in other books. The recipes are intensely practical in effect, and about 30 are alchemical in the sense that they try and transform metal. A few are in Latin rather than Italian. A few have their methods encoded using an included key. Sforza uses colour as her marker for process completion. Her style of alchemy, therefore, needs glass vessels. She includes medicines, antidotes, poisons, money-making things, cosmetics, and confectionery. She has an apothecary in the city of Forlì, and she also bought ingredients from nunneries, which sold pharmacological supplies which were leftovers from their gardens. Caterina and all her kids have botanic gardens for materials. She may have her own laboratory in that garden. Ray calls this her officina. So if you don't want to call your laboratory a laboratory in Ars Magica or Magenomia, office seems a perfectly period-effective alternative. The Florentine nunnery she was educated in had a retail pharmacy, and it sends her fruit, flowers, and so on. It also has a famous scriptorium. Nuns as pharmacists, Sharon Strauchier. This is a quote. Pills, unguents, liquors, elixirs, and possibly cosmetics. Cosmetics are part of alchemy from the very beginning. There's a recipe for triple distillation in Sforza. The first distillation removes freckles, the second distillation cures fistulas, and the third distillation cuts through iron. Alchemical secrets are state secrets because they destroy and disrupt economies. The next chapter in K is about Isabella Cortese. I have not previously seen this work in English. Sforza dies in 1509. February 16th, Venetian treacle. The earliest panacea was made by Mithridates VI of Pontus, who tested venoms and antidotes on his prisoners. A variant was used by the Romans. Galen had one, but it takes years to make. These curatives were called theriacs. The main ingredient of theriacs, in the Venetian version, is vipers caught in the hills around Padua, where the university is. In English, the word theriac becomes treacle, and the best comes from Venice. It's also where the word apothecary, apotheriac, comes from. The London Guild of Physicians inspected apothecary shops for cleanliness and medicinal purity. There is a law about treacle quality, Pharmacy Wares, Drugs and Stuffs Act in 1540. Eventually, only one guy was licensed to make it during Elizabeth's reign, and that was a man called William Bess. Seems like a valuable monopoly. In 1669, Moise Charas deliberately published the recipe he used so that he could damage the Venetian monopoly on theriac. Theriac making includes fermenting herbs, so it takes months. It's strongest after being stored for 6 years, but it lasts for decades. February 17th, Speziale. Speciale are apothecaries, socially below a physician. They stock not just ingredients for medicinal prescriptions, but also with foods, sugared candies, oils, pigments, papers, and ink. And that's a quote from Meredith Ray. Howells says that in Venice, physicians hang out in apothecary shops, but put a copper plaque above the door. If you want a physician, you go to the apothecary. I know that I mispronounce apothecary, by the way. Sorry about that. I believe it's an Australian thing. Let's move on. Jews are allowed to be doctors and bankers and not much else, so there are a lot of Jews in medicine. Venice is a centre for supplies, much as it is a centre for spices. Courts have purchasing factors here. The name, Speciale, literally means spicer, but in the extended sense of pharmacist, compounding, apothecary, cosmetician, ink and dye seller, stationer. Padua University has one on staff. Camilla Uculazzani was an apothecary in Padua and a writer and a saloniere. She thought that the deluge was caused by human extreme longevity. Because human Earth was not returning, it allowed the waters to be comparatively stronger and to rise up. Speciale were social spaces where news was exchanged, so they were important for spying. They were also surveilled by the Inquisition, but recall that in Venice the Inquisition is cowed by the civil government. Camilla Uculazzani also thought science was a way for women to prove their worth and to demand fairness. February 18th. Epistolary networks. Here's a quote from Ray. Recipes performed different functions, depending on the circumstance. By supplying a valuable secret to someone in a higher social position, one might earn status or financial reward. Those already established among the highest levels of society circulated recipes among themselves to reciprocate favours or gifts, establish goodwill and maintain networks of communication, and cement their own position and reputation through access to valuable and even clandestine knowledge. And another quote, recipes were indeed a form of currency used to reciprocate important political intelligence and counsel. A few other quick notes from this section of Daughters of Alchemy. Secrecy can't be a solitary pursuit. It needs insiders and outsiders. Epistolatory novels are considered a feminine genre. A female participant is called a letterata, and a male participant is called a letterato. Sometimes the correspondent is fake. It lets the author talk in two viewpoints and shields them if the other says something heretical, because reporting a conversation isn't the same as holding heretical beliefs. It lets you head off objections by having the other voice them. Some collections are written for the receiver, others for an audience, and when they are collected for publication, serious editing might occur. It gives your ideas reflected glory if the other you are writing to was famous, and lets you show off your classical learning as the other and your experimental credentials as you. Then I make a note about Griffin and Sabine, which you should check out if you haven't read, and it lets the other praise you, so you get to big note yourself in front of the reader. The fashion for secrets, February 19. A secret or experiment is valuable, quote, not as something unknown, but as something proven, end quote. It is not the rarity or weirdness that gives it its value, it's that it works and it has provenance, that is, it comes from a celebrity noble or a doctor. Books of secrets are popular amongst the moneyed class and are part of a movement towards vernacular Italian literature, the volgare, and they are targeted at women. Books of secrets demystify despite their name. Women are the target audience because they contain practical advice on their interests. These books are effective and entertaining, but don't teach underlying philosophical theory. Collecting recipes is linked to the Venetian habit of collecting art, luxury items, and natural curiosities. The occult secret is integral to the marketing of the books, and books in Venetian and Tuscan are easier to sell to women because they are rarely taught Latin. February 20th, Anatomy of a Secret. This is according to Cornado in 1562. A secret may be discovered in 6 ways. These are Ars Magica experience sources. Learned insight, comparison of similar things, from teachers, by travelling the world, by having enough money to do research at home, and through good fortune. And secrets have 3 levels, great, mediocre, and trivial, and the examples given are a cure for the plague, a cure for the fever, and a cure for rashes. Secrets can be perfect, which means 100% effective, or rare, not effective most of the time due to complexity. They may vary in difficulty and cost. Good secrets have 7 attributes. They are authentic, useful, morally sound, have easily acquired ingredients, are relatively quick, are not labour-intensive, and have a noble goal. Recipes and secrets are related. The format, ingredients, methods, tools, isn't similar coincidentally. Much look like early cookbooks, because books of secrets assume that you know certain terms and techniques, much as cookbooks do. So a good secret is easy to use, fast, cheap, dependable, profitable, and moral. It is not necessarily secret in the sense of being occluded. Basics of practice from Isabella de Cortese. Work is practice. Do not waste time on the puzzles of philosophers. Use recipes which are direct. None of this medieval mystical rubbish. Work alone. Use strong glass or terracotta vessels. Become familiar with basic materials. Watch your fire and keep tongs nearby. Do not discuss the art. Keep people out of your lab. Acquire a faithful helper. If successful, give thanks to God and give to the poor. A faithful helper is defined later as experienced, loyal, and discreet. The arrangements of secrets in the 4 volumes shows that stuff we take for granted is miraculous in her time. For example, soap balls that remove all stains because they renew expensive fabric are in with making gold and dyes, not over in the beauty waters and cosmetics. Moderata fonte, modesta poso. Again, this is Ray. This section is about the Querelle des Femmes, which is a sort of rolling, many-sided debate about the role of women. It's not a lot of use for Mythic Venice as a setting, because women being equally capable is baked in, and enemies from the women suck or cosmetics are cursed lines of argument are boring. One take that I saw that I thought was interesting and I hadn't read before, that cosmetics are longevity potions, and that by staving off death they stave off salvation, is a new one. It's insane, but it's new insane. Fonte's earliest work is an incomplete chanson in the Orlando style called Floridoro. Its characters are Rizamonte, who's like Bradmantine, except less interested in men, and Sechetta, who is a literal maga. She's not a witch, she's a magus with the female form. This links into Ars Magica, where we've used maga for magi, who are female, for like 25 real-world years, so it's good to find it in the source documents. Rizamonte's impetus is getting back her inheritance from her sister, and in her happy ending she has a daughter, Salarissa, who is the progenitrix of the Medicis. Cerceta is an amalgam of Alcina, the princess of Cathay, who does illusions, Logista and Melissa, who is the daughter of Circe and Ulysses. She is virginal and wise, and the book is dedicated to Bianca Capello and Francesco de' Medici, who are alchemical practitioners. And then I noticed that Circeeta meant little Circe. Then I debate whether Bianca Capello needs an episode because she's a Venetian practitioner of alchemy who marries into the Medicis in 1579. Cerceta can turn men into trees. She's kept eternally young in a Reggio by her mother's curse that works suspiciously like a blessing, that she can't leave until a man as good as Ulysses comes to rescue her. She's described as brave, severe, courteous, kind, honest, and marvellously wise. She commands the beasts of the forest, and she has 3 handmaidens who appear to be alchemical assistants, among other things. Circe's lore is in the books of the island, and Circe's arts are the good parts. Circe is a powerful natural magician. Fonte's Worth of Women, February 23rd. This is only 16 cantos long. I should get LibriVox to record it. Added later, no, the cantos are bigger than expected. Right. Circe, she can cover every city in the world in fog, raise a mountain, build a temple, change men into swine, bulls, and bears, and she can only do this because it's closer to the true nature of the victims. That is, she has a method to unlock heart beasts. Her palace has astrological statues. Astrology is blamed for women loving men despite their moral deficits. She puts true friendship above true love. Ferrara was damaged by earthquakes in 1570 to 1574, causing a lot of learned speculation about the cause of earthquakes. This book makes really quite extreme claims to Ars Magica's law of essential nature, stating that magic cannot alter men's morals or nature. Similarly, women seem doomed to slavery by their love and compassion, which are not alterable. Fonte gives seeking alchemical gold as a masculine practice, which would surprise many of the practitioners already named in these notes. She then cops out by saying that the sweat of a man's brow is transmuted to gold by his own work, and that is an alchemy that never fails. February 24th. Happy Arcadia, Marinella, has a Maga called Urnia in her book Enrico, has two Magi and a Maga in Happy Arcadia. Check also Asilla in the same book. And then there's a family tree. There's a Magus called Siberione, and he has an apprentice called Erimeno, and Erimeno can talk to all creatures, has a garden of multi-grafted trees via natural magic, has a collection in a grotto including gems, roots, stones, herbs, a camera obscura, a hydraulic organ, an automaton of a shepherd that puts real shepherds into the uncanny valley so they think it's motivated by demons, and a substance called Radiano, which conveys the air of respectability to the wearer. There's a note here that might be radium. Seems strange. I don't think that was discovered at the time. And it says he was trained on the highest mountains, which in Ars Magica probably means in a big magical aura. Siberione has a daughter called Arato, and she is a natural magician. Siberione can, by the way, travel the world in a few hours via his chariot pulled by 4 black coursers. But back to Arato. She's a natural magician, astronomer, and prophetess. She has a fiery visage, which I presume is piercing gaze virtue. She has a companion called Armilla. She is chaste, virginal, and Diana-like. She has an exceptional mind. She is called the New Hypatia. She has a garden above the clouds, and she thinks the Milky Way is made of stars, not the afflatus of the Earth. That can get you banned later on in period. February 25th. Enrico. Enrico is a historical epic set around the Fourth Crusade. It contains a Maga called Irina. She's wise, chaste, rules an island of women, of 100 beautiful virgins. She greets noble male shipwreck victims. She has a study companion called Altea. Irina's teacher was her father, Felino, who learned from his father, who learned from the Magus Armano. Her father was an astrologer, so his lab is up another mountain. He's very perceptive of first causes and only teaches good magic to his daughter. He counsels his daughter in a dream, Force Ghost style, because he's dead, that the shipwrecked knight is related to her and was wrecked on the island via a divine providence. If he returns to the war, he will die. Still, he must be allowed a free choice in the matter. Irina takes a knight on a tour of the world, giving the reader a primer on Venetian ideas of geography, and he leaves to join the Venetian assault on Constantinople and dies. They travel by a flying chariot led by winged lions. Note the winged lion is an important Venetian symbol. Padua University, February 26th. Good grief, this is short. This needs to be done far better. Founded by Venice in 1545, there are a mix of students and scholars from all across Europe. It has alumni all over the place, Walsingham for example. It has the first botanical gardens, it says here. I doubt that's true, because I know that the French had them before. First in where, I wonder? It's a centre for medicine and anatomy. It exports alchemical practices via alumni to many courts, and it has a humanist curriculum focusing on classical languages, history, theology, astronomy, and mathematics. February 27th. The predicted floods of 1524. I've already used this in Magonomia, but in Venice the idea that a rare conjunction in Pisces means global deluge is a huge, huge deal. This is first published in 1522, and this leads to a flurry of what's called diluvian literature. Oddly, the Church's position that global flooding would require a miracle because Aristotle says that water doesn't spontaneously flood the land is more reassuring than contemporary science, which is full of yeah, but maybe ideas. Italy does get floods in that decade, likely because of deforestation. And then there's a note there that we should do something for its 500th anniversary. And a note to myself that I've not worked on the Safatinga flotilla idea. It's not at all relevant to this, but I'll just quickly mention it. There's a flood in Holland in 1570 that does enormous damage, and the English send a relief fleet. So that could be useful for a story idea. Margherita Sorocci, February 28th. We're getting to the end. Calidora. In the poem Scandabide by Margherita Sorocci, there is a Maga called Calidora. Sorocci was a correspondent with Galileo and asked him for editing and help in translating her writing into paid patronage. Her book was published in a second edition with the Calidora plotline removed, which is suspicious. In real life, that was probably to make the war story the sharper focus. Calidora forms a link between the earlier Societa and the latter Arena, and this could be actual in-game. The additions are in 1606 and 1623, so the acceleration that is caused by the Master of Games is needed. She wears a sun and moon diadem and is presented as an amalgam of male and female, which are science and love as elements. She's slighted in love by her husband and heads out to the forest to make a love potion. There's some good flavour text here. Quote, "At the appointed hour, in a lonely spot, she sprinkles amber, myrrh, and other choice scents over a fire of ebony that burns with no smoke at all, and she lets down her golden locks into the wind, and removing the hearts from 3 live doves with a single knife, she writes his name upon the page in her own blood." She has a wax image of him as well. That quote is from Meredith K. Ray. She could be a Titalis, because she is said to revel in public enmities by her detractors. And that brings us to the end of February and to the end of my notes from Daughters of Alchemy. Next month, we start filling out what you would find in a spices shop by going through all of the colours and their sources and what mystical associations they had in local folklore. Your saga may vary.